Sounds like we're having fun with the bells. Okay, we're going to conclude our quarter. We've discussed Ezekiel. We've been talking about Daniel. We've done an accelerated pace on Daniel, having done the first 6 chapters in a single lesson, and we're going to attempt, and most likely fail, to do the last 6 chapters today. So hopefully we can at least get to chapter 9 and we can summarize chapters 10 through 12 as best we can. But we're starting the second half, and I forgot the clicker again. So we're starting the second half of Daniel, and it's a transition chapter in Daniel 7. It's an extremely important chapter. In fact, a lot of commentators call this the most important chapter in all of Daniel, and some even within all of the Old Testament. And it's because it's going to change the literary, it's a literary turning point. We're going from those historical accounts in the first 6 chapters, and now we're going to go into some visions. So it's this transitional chapter. We can see that there's subject matter that's going to be followed because of it, and it's tying the 2 sections together. This chapter is effectively joining those historical to the future apocalyptic literature. So as we start this, it's going to have an enormous impact on future Jewish literature. The whole idea of this future vision, the influence that it's going to have even on the New Testament and Revelation is very critical. Walter Brueggemann, he's a theologian. He writes a lot of the textbooks on the Old Testament. He writes that the focus on the human conflict in those first 6 chapters will be, it will transition into these visions, and chapter 7 is going to reveal that the conflict is much larger than man on man. It's not just human. We're going to see a cosmic, we're going to see a heavenly conflict, and it's going to be represented by some beasts in a moment. And this conflict's going to be in heaven, and there's going to be divine justice, and there's going to be a concept that is going to emerge that is new to the Old Testament. There's this idea of death after life. What's after death? Life after death. And until this point, we really don't have a clear indication of the Hebrews' vision of what happens after death. And it's going to be interesting because we're going to see in Daniel 12, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. This heavenly justice having an impact on humans even after they've died. This afterlife. So the apocalyptic literature is going to offer this new theological vision in Judaism. And there's an article written in this magazine called Themelius, and the article's written by T. Desmond Alexander. And if you have any idea of what the Old Testament said about the afterlife, this is an interesting read because it's clarifying a lot of different things, different aspects that you'll read about in the progression of the Hebrew texts. We have some idea in Job, but Job, if you remember, it's more of a theodicy, which is an explanation of God, an omnipotent, omniscient, all-loving God that allows the existence of evil. And in fact, Job, specifically, that type of evil that's being discussed is suffering. So Job discusses these things, but more of this explanation of the existence of evil in a realm where a God that we describe as Christians could allow it. So in this Greco-Roman period, there's going to be this theological conversion from what they believed was going to happen after death to this life after death. And we're going to get a really good picture of that. And there's some points of interest before we get too far into it. There's first of all, there's three additional additions to the text that you'd find in the Roman Catholic or the Eastern Orthodox or even some Protestant Bibles that we don't see in our Bibles. I discussed this a few weeks ago, that there's portions of Daniel that had been removed because it wasn't viewed as canon by the rabbis. And even Jerome in his commentary makes it clear, in my opinion, that he doesn't think it belongs in the canon either, even though it's going to be offered into the Vulgate because the church fathers at that time said that it needed to be. But the three things that are taken out, one is found in Daniel 3, and it's called the Prayer of Azariah, or the Song of the Three Jews. And then there's another portion called Susanna, or Susanna and the Elders, and then there's Bel and the Dragon. So it's interesting because my stepfather Tommy found this Catholic Bible for me, and in here there's 14 chapters to Daniel, and all of those that I just said is included in the book itself. It's very, very interesting, but also we don't view it as canon. We would view that as apocrypha. They view it as pseudo-deuteronomical, but it's apocrypha to us, so we don't include it because we don't believe that it's canon. It's not the words of God, but interesting nonetheless. So also during the historical section of Daniel, you'll remember Daniel, it was read in the third person. What we're about to read for the next 6 chapters is typically in the first person, all except for right at the beginning, anywhere after the second verse of chapter 7 and I believe the first verse of chapter 10. It's all going to be in the first person, showing that it's Daniel's account. Daniel is giving his account. It's going to be his vision. It's going to be the words of God to him. We are also going to see that the prophecies are going to be related to 4 world empires and the second arrival of Christ. And if you remember the first arrival, or if you remember from chapter 2, it's going to talk about the first arrival of Christ, and then we're going to have the visions of both first and second arrivals of the Lord in the coming chapters. Regarding chapters 7 through 12, it's very chronological. They're in a sequence. Chapter 7 is the first year of Belshazzar. Chapter 8 is the third year of Belshazzar. And chapter 9 is going to be the first year of Darius the Mede. Chapters 10 through 12 will be the third year of Cyrus. So the first and the second visions will be during that Babylonian time period, and the third and fourth will be the time of the Persian rules, which is interesting because if you remember, that will put the first 2 visions occurring around the time of that feast, the handwriting on the wall in chapter 5, and then chapters 9 is likely going to be right before the lion's den in chapter 7 or chapter 6. The fourth vision would also probably be it's at the end of the time period. It's the end, and it's the last and latest dated material of Daniel. Now, the apocalyptic part of the book of Daniel is not nearly as hard to interpret as modern readers like to make it. Apocalyptic literature is important. It is something that the readers of that time saw it differently than we see it. Biblical apocalyptic literature should be understood as an account that was intended for parties. And those parties, the way they received them, are the way we should receive them. And even though it's unfamiliar to us, it was very familiar to them, and understanding their point of view, or their lens, if you will, is extremely important. So the symbolism, which is key, which sometimes baffles, and sometimes people like to fantasize with and make more mystical than it has to be, is pretty clear when you look at the text itself. The text itself will explain it, and when the text itself doesn't, then other scriptures typically do. And it's when we take that step beyond Scripture to try to explain some of these, that's when we have some issues. So a valid principle for interpreting prophecy is to just accept the plain language. Accept the plain language unless there's a good reason not to. So in Daniel 7 through 12, we're going to see many symbols, and they're straightforward. So the modern reader might not recognize the figurative language, might even think it's fantastic fantasy stuff, but what we're about to read is going to be something that is something they understood directly and had emotional feelings, expressions of realization of what the angel or what Daniel would be relaying. So we're going to start with the first beast. We have in chapter 7, verses 1 through 14, we're going to be talking about some beasts. And I'm going backwards, aren't I? We're going to be talking about some beasts. Now, this first vision is going to be during that time of Belshazzar that I mentioned. We've had discussions about this time period. He is the co-regent for his father, Nabonidus, and it's going to be that time period where Nabonidus is not actually ruling. He's allowed his son to take over as co-regent for some reason. We don't know exactly when it occurs, but we do believe that it's going to be happening right around that time of the handwriting, or right before the handwriting. And what we're about to see is some horrifying beasts arising out of a chaotic sea. Now, those are descriptive terms, horrifying and chaotic. And there's a reason why I chose those words. The vision's going to mystify us because it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But each thing's going to resonate with those modern readers. So he's going to start with this description of a creature rising out of the sea. Now, the sea is known in the ancient Near East as representing chaos. Water is representing chaos. In this instance, we're going to see the four winds coming from all four directions, producing a scene of chaos. And as I said, this is a long-established symbol for chaos. In that Babylonian creation story, the Enuma Elish that I mentioned a few weeks ago, it starts from chaos. The Canaanite creation story of Baal, the Baal myth, it starts from the creation of the world coming from the controlling of the chaotic seas. And then, of course, we have lots of examples in the Bible where we discuss the chaos of the water. You can see that in Proverbs 8, Job 38. There's going to be, the psalmists are going to talk about it, the Proverbs are going to talk about it. And we also associate the sea with the monsters from the sea. You can recall from Job 41, Psalm 74, Isaiah 27, there's 3 or 4 more places, the creature, the Leviathan. And like the Leviathan, it's going to be a creature. These are creatures coming from the sea. So the Jewish reader is going to immediately have this gut-wrenching reaction because we have monsters coming from the chaotic sea. And they're not just ordinary monsters, are they? these monsters are going to take on a different appearance. They're going to be hybrids. Now, hybrid is a bad word to the Hebrews. If you remember back in Leviticus 19, combining things is bad. As a matter of fact, for those of you that don't like mismatched clothes, I think you get that straight from Leviticus 19. It talks about not mixing the fabrics, right? My wife is a big believer in Leviticus 19. Every time I try to leave, she points that out to me. So when we start talking about a hybrid of something, we know they're really getting a vision of something that is going to be upsetting. It's going to cause turmoil with them. And this first one is going to be repulsive because we have an animal, the lion, with the wings. So it's a hybrid. It's also going to really offend because it's going to take on a human position, a human posture, a human form. So the idea of this hybrid animal, this mixture, this thing that should not exist, now taking on the human form, is absolutely going to create an upsetting feeling. The second beast is not a hybrid, but it is a bear. And the bear was one of the most dangerous animals known to them. Think Elisha, chapter 12. No, Elisha, 2 Kings, chapter 2. The bear mauls. The bear is extremely dangerous. It's violent. And in this picture that we're getting here, it's taking a violent pose. It's going to be lying on its side. It's gnawing on ribs. And then there's going to be a voice. And what's the voice say? Get up. Get up and eat your fill of flesh. What a description of a beast that kills, mauls, and now is being instructed by presumably a heavenly voice saying to eat your fill of flesh. The third beast is another hybrid. We're back to a beast of prey. It's going to be a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. And now the leopard is a predator, and it's among one of the fastest carnivores. And with the addition of the 4 wings, it would be extremely swift. And with the 4 heads, it would be especially devouring. So this is extremely upsetting. In fact, when we get to the interpretation, it's going to be pretty obvious to the readers who this is because of some of the description there. The fourth beast is the most troubling. The first 3 are horrible, but this one's going to take it to a new level. This one's different because it is not a beast that humans have ever seen or could even comprehend. It's different in that it's beyond human experience. The only physical description is that we get from this part in the vision is its iron teeth. And later during the interpretation, we're going to see iron teeth and the bronze claws. But Daniel's going to describe his understanding of what this metallic beast is communicating by saying that it's terrifying, frightening, and very powerful. So the fourth beast has some additional descriptive detail. The fact that this animal has horns. Now, horns are a very well-known biblical symbol of strength. And while most animals have 2 horns, this one's going to have 10. And interestingly enough, 3 of those horns are going to be replaced by a single horn that is going to, as is described, have human characteristics. It's going to have the ability to have, it has eyes, it has the ability to declare words, and it's going to declare proud words. And this is confusing. This has a lot of the symbols, but it's going to require some interpretation. All of this requires some interpretation. So we have these beasts, And next, we have a human-like defined figure. We have in verses 9 through 14, the Ancient of Days, a title that's going to indicate a person of great antiquity, someone old. And the further description of this person is amazing. It all is going to be important. First, it's in the setting of a courtroom. Not any courtroom that I've been in, but in the setting of a courtroom. It's going to have the Ancient of the Days sitting in this courtroom, surrounded by thousands of his angels. He's wearing a white robe. He's engulfed in, the throne is engulfed in flames, and there's a river of flames running from it. Fire is going to illuminate, but it burns, right? So here God is clearly being set in the role of judge, rendering judgment. And the whole scene is something that would be gripping and should be gripping to us. I believe there's a picture in here that is a description of what is being, a display of what's being described. So the object of the judgment of the Ancient of Days is implicit, and it's made clear in verses 11 and 12. The boastful words of the destructive little horn had drawn the attention of the Ancient of Days, and the result is going to be that fourth beast will be destroyed. The host of that boastful horn will be destroyed. So, in the presence of this Ancient of Days will come one like the Son of Man. Now, we've been talking about Son of Man in Ezekiel, if you recall, and we're going to get a little more on that. But imagine the scene that is being described. This one like the Son of Man is going to be coming from the clouds. Now, the clouds is another indication of divinity. In the ancient Near East, the clouds were demonstrative of their gods. In fact, Baal was called the rider of the clouds, or the cloud rider, and that's in the Ugaritic myth. But the idea is this is clearly God, but we've also got Ancient of Days over here, which is God. So we have a first appearance and a second appearance, and this second appearance is clearly being referenced as God and as Jesus, the Savior. The ancient readers would recognize this form. The ancient reader would have understood that we have God in the presence of God. And indeed, the Ancient of Days is going to provide or empower or state that the one like the Son of Man is given authority, glory, and sovereign power, and all nations and peoples of every language will worship him. His dominion will be everlasting. It will never pass away, and his kingdom will be one that will never be destroyed. What a scene. What a scene. So now to the interpretation. Daniel's a little bit perplexed. He recognizes the symbols. He understands the language. But what can it mean specifically? So an angel is going to begin with an interpretation starting in verses 15 through 28. And he's going to show that the beastly human kingdoms will oppress the people of God. God is allowing these kingdoms, these beastly kingdoms, to rule for a time. But God is still in control. Now, there will be a final victory. Now, Daniel still wants a little more. So, he asks about that fourth beast, and specifically that little horn. And the angel's going to get a little more description there in verses 19 through 22. Daniel's going to recount that the beast was very frightening and devastatingly different than all the rest. And why did the little horn have the features of a man, a human, with eyes and a mouth? And why would it uproot the three other horns? So at this point, the angel responds by saying that the fourth beast is a fourth kingdom and that the 10 horns are 10 kings of that kingdom. The little horn is a king that will arise and will direct his ill will against the holy people. He will interrupt the set times, the set Sabbaths, the festivals. He's going to interrupt all of those things, as well as the holy people's law. And this will take place for a period, a time, times or 2 times, and a half time, which appears to be a very mysterious way of saying it. But basically, there will be a time to start, a time to end. But we're going to be able to see who this fourth beast is representing in just a moment. And if you recall some of the 2 previous lessons, I mentioned this Maccabean thesis that there's modern readers, especially, or scholars, that believe that this portion of Daniel specifically was written in a later date by a third party who was a pseudo-Daniel. And we're going to see from here on why there's several things here that they pin their hat on because they don't understand providence, they don't understand divine, they don't understand the whole idea that God can give somebody the true skill of prophecy, and it's not just something made up like what they were doing in the Babylonian university that Daniel and the 3 had to go through with the Babylonian wise men. But the point is, this fourth beast is going to represent that time in that 2nd century BC king or ruler. That is why Antiochus, and that's why they want to place this at that time period, because it's a lot easier to tell what's happened than it is to predict with such definite detail, is what the modern scholars would point out. But this fourth beast is definitely talking about a specific time and a specific ruler who is going to oppress violently the Jews. He's going to ransack the temple. He's going to stop the typical days of worship or the festivals and events. And that occurs in the 2nd century. So the message of this vision is God's people is living in oppression, and they're living it right then. They know they're in oppression. And there's going to be continued oppression, time and time, kingdom and kingdom. These beasts that are being representative of these kingdoms are going to continue to come. They're going to oppress. They're going to be violent. And they're going to be boastful. They're going to be completely opposing the sovereign God. And the thing we're supposed to get, and the thing that they were supposed to get, was it will end. The violent human kingdoms will be no more, and the suffering of God's people will stop. And it will be God's kingdom that will rule forever. It will be the Christ. It will be that second arrival. And all these things will alleviate the despair. And the vision basically pulls back this curtain of what they're experiencing and allowing them to see that it won't be forever. Now, Daniel 8 gets interesting as well. We're going to have a goat and a ram. And now this is going to occur about 2 years after the first vision. And Daniel himself is going to tell the reader about this vision. He's going to be talking in first person, and he's going to recount it, and he's going to recount the interpretation that's going to be supplied by a heavenly being. And he dates it as the 3rd year of Belshazzar in Daniel 8, verse 1. As we will see, the vision, like the previous one, is going to be highly symbolic and it needs interpretation. The connection to history is made more concrete than the other because it's going to name specific nations. So there is not the same kind of disagreement that people can have over the Daniel 7 visions. This is going to be more clear because Daniel gets very specific. Still, there will be some things that need to be clarified. The overall theme will remain the same, but there's still going to be some difficulties. But in the end, I think we'll see that the final victory is God's and God is in control. So this starts at the Ulai Canal in verses 2 through 14. And this is near Susa. Susa is an extremely important city in Persia. And we're going to have a lone ram up here. Now, the lone ram has 2 horns, but it's distinctive because one horn is longer than the other. Then this ram is going to strike out in every direction, and nothing can stop it. No other animal could challenge this ram because this ram had became great in verse 4. The appearance of the goat is in verses 5 through 8. Now, this goat attacks the ram, and he attacks from the west. And it's going to have a prominent horn between the eyes, and it's going to attack, and it's going to break off the ram's 2 horns. And without the horns, the ram it's defenseless. It's destroyed. The goat will destroy the defenseless ram. Now the goat has become a very great goat, according to verse 5. And at the height of its greatness, the goat is going to have the horn broken off and replaced by 4 other horns. Now, the idea of the one horn we'll see is representative of a single leader who's going to be struck down early in life. Now, the horn grew south and east toward what was described as the beautiful land. The power of this horn is such that it challenges all the powers, even the heavenly powers. And there's a comment about the starry host, which is the angelic realm, if you look it up. So this is a challenge to God himself. This leader, this kingdom and its leader is challenging God himself. And it affects the worship of God by suspending the daily sacrifice and throwing down the sanctuary, the temple. Now, God's people is going to become a victim of another powerful horn. Interestingly, this devastation is said to be caused by the rebellion of presumably God's people themselves. Now, the interpretation of verses 15 through 27, from the 6th century perspective, it's going to be difficult to know who he's talking about because it hasn't happened yet. And that's why this Maccabean thesis, these people want to explain that away by saying, well, it must not have been in 6th century. It must have been in the 2nd century when all of these things had taken place and Antiochus is actually ruling and doing the devastating events that is being described. But we recognize this as a vision that God has allowed Daniel to receive and to be interpreted by an angel so that he can provide the information to his faithful people. So while Daniel's trying to understand this vision, he's going to notice someone like a man standing, and this turns out to be Gabriel. Now, we've met Gabriel I guess we meet Gabriel here. We've met him. The term is used in Luke We see him in a few other places, but basically this is the angel commissioned to speak on behalf of God. And an unidentified voice is going to order him to explain what Daniel has just seen, and presumably God informing Gabriel to give the interpretation. And Gabriel's going to start by telling that the vision concerns the time of the end in verse 17. It's not quite clear what that means. Immediately it's not clear, but at the end of times, the present oppression or maybe some other end. But he does identify the first animal. And the first animal with the two horns is known as the nations of Media and Persia. The goat is Greece, and the prominent horn is its first king, who later readers would know is Alexander the Great. And if you know his history, he was killed. He died while he was very young. So through this identification, it would be beyond that 6th century BC Daniel's knowledge. The breaking of the first horn represents Alexander's death at a young age, and the 4 horns that replaced are the 4 generals, often referred to as the Diadochi, the War of the Diadochis, when the generals divided up the Greek Empire between themselves and got to fight it out a little bit. So it's the violent and destructive horn at the end of the vision that would wreak havoc on the people of God and their worship. That is definitely describing Antiochus, who we've talked about several times in the previous classes. So this king will rise up when rebels have become completely wicked in verse 23. He will oppress the holy people in verse 24 and challenge even God himself, the Prince of Princes, in verse 25. And in spite of his success, he will be destroyed, but not by human power. Gabriel is going to announce that it's not human power. On the evening of the mornings, it's true, after 2,300 evenings and mornings, that will take place between the desecration and the reconstructing or the reconstructing of the sanctuary. That's the temple. Now, these numbers are not necessarily intended to be something to take as specific times or dates or lengths, but it does represent a definite time. It's not an indefinite time. There is a starting, there is an end. It will occur, and that is what is intended by these numbers. Now, so when we look at chapter 9, we can understand Daniel's confusion. We can understand why he sought more interpretation. He understood the symbols, but a lot of this happens after the Babylonian Empire, after the Persian Empire. This is going to relate to kingdoms that come. This is clearly future. The 4 horns and the little horn would be completely unknown to Daniel. But for those future readers, they would recognize this clearly as the various kingdoms, the leaders, the Antiochus, who in the mid-2nd century brought all this unprecedented persecution on the faithful people. And the vision determines that it will end. The persecution will end. The leader may plunder the temple, but it's only going to be for a period of time, a set period of time. The date may not be certain, but it will come to an end because, after all, again, God is in control and will have the final victory. Now, Daniel 9, the 70 weeks. So the exile is going to continue. Daniel 9 is a vision. It's different than the first 2 because Daniel's been studying, and he's been studying from something very specific. And I hope you guys recognize how unique this is. He's studying from the book of Jeremiah. Now, keep in mind, Jeremiah was just 2 generations ahead of Daniel, right? So whether he had the book of Jeremiah or not is it is an amazing thing to say he's reading from the book of Jeremiah. And it's even more amazing that he names it. We read all kinds of places in the Old Testament where they reference previous and prior scriptures. But in this case, he actually names it. So it is unique in that fact. We're going to see that this event's going to take place after the time of it's actually the first year of the reign of Darius. So we've got this, he's speaking back in first person again, and he's going to be reading from the book of Jeremiah. He's going to read the earlier prophet, receiving the prophecy in Josiah's 13th year that God continues to speak to him until the fall of Jerusalem and even beyond the exile for a few years. And remember, what we're reading about is the exile of 70 years. And what we know about that reading is the section from Jeremiah is supposed to be from the 4th year of Jehoiakim and the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So this is approximately the date when Daniel and the 3 friends were taken into captivity. So towards the end of Daniel's life, this time period, let's just look at Jeremiah 25, verses 11 through 12, and then Daniel's attention is going to be riveted on God's message to Jeremiah. That's because of the sin of God's people. So when you look at Jeremiah 25 and also in 29, we see that the whole country is wasteland. Its nation's going to have to serve Babylon for 70 years. And these 70 years are going to have to be fulfilled. And the king will be punished, and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, will be made desolate forever, is from that reading. And that's what he's read. And now he's read about this 70-year exile, and he realizes that from the chronological standpoint, that 70 years should be coming up sometime soon. So he's going to have a prayer, and this is going to be a prayer of restoration. In verses 4 through 19, he's first going to confess the sins of Israel, and then he's going to praise God. And this is back in that standard treaty, that classical treaty, ancient Near East treaty format, but it's a confession of Israel's sin. He's going to praise God's character, and then he's going to articulate the situation. This is where we are. This is the curses of the covenant. This is the result of the scattering. This is the object of the scorn. And he's going to request that God intervene. And he ends his prayer with an impassioned plea for mercy. He asks God to stop the punishment and restore the sanctuary of Jerusalem. And he does not ask God to rescue them because their own merits, because they don't have any merits for the rescue. But he asks for the rescue just because they bear his name. They are his people. So the response of the 77s, Daniel gets an immediate answer to his prayer. The angel's going to tell him it's not time yet. It's coming, but it's not time yet. And the exile is going to come to an end, but it's not anytime soon. There will be an end. The period of 77s will come to an end. So, quickly getting through Daniel 10. Daniel 10 through 12 is the last of the visions. And it's going to be talking about the king of the south, king of the north. It's going to be talking about different rulers during this historical time period. And it's going to be referencing them. And in the end, it's going to basically come down to God is in control, and everyone whose name is found in the written in the book will be delivered there in verse 1 of chapter 12. So, Daniel, 12 not always easy chapters and 2 classes. I'm confident that you have a lot you can go read and study about. It's 6 stories and 4 visions, and the one key thing in all of them, in the visions, in the stories, in everything, is that God is in control. Our life, our country's existence, its future, everything about us is in God's hands. It's in God's control. And the angel is always reassuring Daniel in these visions and in these stories that he has an allotted inheritance, and he can't fret about the stuff that's happening because God will always be there for him. God is the sovereign God of all nations. I appreciate you guys' attendance and your willingness to sit there patiently through all of that. You guys have a wonderful day. Next week, we're going to start on James, so it's going to be a completely different study.